Africa.
Yeah, and from the Philippines.
Yeah, I wonder what the time difference is. What time is it in South Africa?
So in South Africa is the same time as we have, like in Turkey. So all plus 1 hour, minus 1 hour. So it's approximately the same. That's why it's convenient for them. Okay,
Oh, that's amazing.
And we are live, I guess. Hello, everyone. Hello. I hope that you can hear and see us well. So it started. Yeah, that's great. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. So that's so good to see so many of you joining us today. And we were discussing that there are many teachers from South Africa today and yesterday as well. So, okay, hello once again and welcome. Today we are going to have our new teacher development webinar. And we are going to talk about a very important topic in teaching English, which is teaching grammar to your young learners and online. So, and that's actually not as boring as it sounds, and we will try our best to prove it to you. And for that, let me introduce to you our host, Brittany. And if you participated in our webinars before, you definitely know her. She's one of our Novakid teachers. So with over 10 years of experience, and also she's a teacher trainer. And a fun fact that I learned about Brittany quite recently is that Brittany has a black belt in Taekwondo. So I think that it's something really admirable, and I really love learning some fun facts about our teachers. So let's say hi to Brittany in the chat box and welcome.
All right. Thank you, Lisa, for such a warm welcome, and welcome back everyone to another webinar. It's great to see so many teachers from all around the world. We were talking earlier because I was like, what time is it in South Africa? Because I love doing these webinars, but today I woke up at 4:30. So I'm like, is it 4:30 for everyone? Like, no, it's not. It's probably a much more friendly time for you where you live. But I am really excited for today's webinar because I get to introduce my new co-host, Lisa. And Lisa is a teacher development manager who does a little bit of everything here at Novakid. She is involved in course writing. She's involved in teacher certification for our different levels. And a fun fact that I recently learned is that Lisa used to be a professional skydiver. Now, I am not brave enough to jump out of a plane, but if you are, let me know in the comments. Have you skydived in the past? I'm going to see how many of you are brave enough to do that, and say hello to Lisa in the chat at the same time. We also have Alona back today for in our chat box to moderate and take your questions and add some comments. And if you have any questions during today's webinar, please feel free to ask them when you think of them. You don't have to save them till the end because she will collect them and then bring them up at the end. So if you have a question, ask it right away. Now, Alona is also a teacher development manager and an experienced ESL teacher. She's responsible for keeping us all up to date in the teacher portal, and she really wants us to use that in the best way possible. Also, because we're sharing fun facts about each other, Alona used to be a child actor. I really loved learning these two facts about my co-hosts and for our moderator today, because that's super interesting and it's great to learn more about each other. If you have a fun fact that you would like to share about yourself, I would love to learn what it is, and you can put it in the chat box and also give a shout out and say hello to Alona now. All right, I am going to share our presentation for today. You should see it on your screen now. So why are we here today? Well, in this webinar, we'll look at why teaching grammar properly is so important and the progression throughout the curriculum. We'll review different techniques to keep your students engaged and to help them learn the grammar in an effective way. We'll learn about some different techniques and how to increase your students' confidence while they apply these things in context. They will also make your lessons more fun and enjoyable, not just for you, but also for your students. Let's go through our agenda for today. We will start with a short warm-up activity like we always do, and then talk about why grammar is important and what it looks like within the CFR. We'll look at some top tips on how to teach grammar effectively, followed by some grammar games that you can take today and apply to your lessons right away or in the next few days. Finally, we will have a short Q&A at the end, so do ask those questions. Now, I'm sure you are already following the Novakid Career Instagram page, but if you're not, make sure you scan that QR code on your screen now so that you can stay up to date with the latest tips and tricks and news. There's some great cultural aspects there as well. And it's a really great resource to keep up to date. However, unlike our previous webinars, you won't find one of our Novakid Game World characters hidden among the slides. And that's because we've prepared a different type of contest for you. After the webinar, make sure you fill out the feedback form. You will see a slide from one of our levels, and your job will be to explain how you would teach that to your student. It doesn't have to be very long. 3 or 4 sentences is enough. Teacher development will read all of your responses and choose the best 3, and those teachers will be awarded and be featured in an upcoming newsletter. So now I'd like to welcome Lisa back to lead our warm-up activity and to share something special with all of you.
Yeah, before we actually start, the content team asked to say thank you to some of our teachers who really helped the content team with some finding typos or some minor inconsistencies. So everything that makes our content better, because of course, you guys, the teachers, really have a good eye for such things. And that's great when you share these things with the content team or with the support. So thank you, Deborah, Queen, BJ, Damian, Diana, Lauren, and everybody who helps us develop our content. So Brittany as well, actually. Brittany always helps us with finding some mistakes in the curriculum. So that's true. It's not me who is saying that. So, okay, I think that we are ready for our warm-up. If you participated in our webinars before, you know exactly what to do. Please take your phones, any other devices, scan the QR code that you can see on your screen. Or if you don't have this opportunity, you can just follow the link which you will receive now in the chat box. Let me share my screen. So I hope that you can see my screen now. Another way to access the Menti platform is to go to menti.com and enter the code that you will see throughout the presentation, so which is 29, etc. If you connected to the platform, please press this heart button and we will see how many people we have here. So now we have 15 people, 20 people. Whoa, that's fast. That's great. So 50 people already. That's great. Okay. I think that we are ready to start. And our first question is going to be the following. How do you feel about teaching grammar? You can describe your feelings in 1 word, in 3 words, in as many words if you want. So challenging, that's the winner. Nervous, reluctant. So comfortable, uncertain, so stressful, eager, so hard. Challenging is still the winner. So Brittany, how do you feel when you teach grammar?
I can definitely empathize with those who think that grammar is challenging or a little bit difficult, because it is. It's difficult to put yourself in the shoes of your student to anticipate the questions that they might have. I personally love teaching grammar, but it wasn't always that way for me. It was only through practice and experience that I came to really love the challenge of teaching grammar to my students. And I really anticipate when they reach those higher levels and I get to teach them the difference between two grammar tenses that they've learned. But that's something that I definitely was not confident in 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And it's something that now I can really empathize with those who think that grammar is challenging. But I also really hope that after today's webinar, you do feel a little bit more confident teaching grammar to your students.
So, okay, thank you guys for sharing. I think that we have so many words now, at least 72. That's great. And let's move on to our next question. So, how confident do you feel teaching these particular structures? The present continuous, the comparative adverbs, the past simple, the passive, and the first conditional. Please rate these grammar structures from 1, not confident at all, to 5, very confident. Okay. Seems like the comparative adverbs is something that is easy for many teachers.
Which is a little bit shocking to me because this is one of those tenses that I really struggle with. And it's great that we are all confident in different areas and that our strengths lie in different areas because we can help each other. I definitely feel that teaching comparative adverbs is one of the weaker areas that I have when it comes to teaching grammar, because in order to do that, the student really needs to know what an adjective is, and they also really need to know what an adverb is. And sometimes explaining the difference to your student without using the word adjective and adverb is really difficult. So I'm always, when it comes up to that unit that I know that my student's going to have, I'm always like, okay, how am I going to do this differently? Or what did I do last time that worked really well? But I see here that a lot of teachers think that teaching the passive is a little bit more difficult. And what do you think about that, Lisa?
Definitely the passive is the most difficult structure that we have here, not for teaching, but also for learning. So I can't relate to, I don't find teaching the first conditional difficult. So it's my favorite grammar structure in English. But yeah, I think that's true. The passive is the hardest one. I would vote this way. Okay, thank you for sharing your opinions. And now let's move to our next question. In what level do students learn must and mustn't? If you're not a Novakid teacher, we have some CFR levels that are similar to our Novakid levels, so you can just find a reference there. Okay, level 2, level 3, level 4. Also, we have level 0 and level 1. I love the questions when it's possible to choose any answer. So because sometimes it seems that it's too difficult. Okay. And most of our teachers think that it's level 3 and it's level 3. That's right. So we start learning must and mustn't at level 3, and also we continue doing so at level 4. So if you answered level 4, it's okay. The next question. In what level do students learn can and can't? So, level 2, level 1, level 0.
A lot of level 2s.
Yeah, that's a surprise, actually. And right after I said that, level 2 became less popular.
Isn't that always the way, though?
Yeah. Okay, so nobody answers level 4. That's right. I think that's this structure is way too simple for level 4. And most of our teachers answered level 1. which is also quite surprising because we start teaching we start teaching can and can't at level 0 actually. So, and we continue doing so at level 1. So level 0 and level 1 are correct answers. At level 2, the student should be already confident with this structure. The next question. We already have some answers for this question. At what level do students learn the question tags? Okay, now level 4 is the leader.
It's almost like straight across.
Okay, so level 3 or level 4, it sounds quite logical. So basically we teach the question tags at level 4 because you know that the question tags is actually quite a complicated piece of grammar because the students need to have a lot of prior knowledge for that. That's why the correct answer is level 4. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, it's in the end even. So.
Yeah, it's towards the end. I think it's like unit 9 or unit 10. Like it's quite far into level 4.
Okay, and the last question, which is a little bit tricky, but let's see your opinions. What is more important in teaching English, in your opinion, vocabulary or grammar?
I love this question because it's so polarizing. Because you have like your diehard like grammar is more important, and then you have your diehard no, vocabulary is more important. So it's great to see where the division is. And also that vocabulary always wins.
Yes, I feel pity for grammar. Yeah. So most people think that vocabulary is more important.
And I agree. I agree with them. Well, to a point. I definitely think that vocabulary is more important when you're first starting to learn a language, because you can rely a lot on gestures to get you through for the grammar. You can just say words and hopefully the person you're communicating with will be able to string it together depending on the context. And I like to use the example of when I was learning Spanish for the first time. When I lived in Spain, I had a great vocabulary and I was great at the present simple. So I would use all of my words only in the present simple. And then I would gesture like, I want to say this in the future, or I want to say this in the past. And it got me by for a time. Later on, when I was getting more proficient at Spanish, I would focus more on grammar, because at that point it becomes more important to focus on different structures to communicate more effectively. But I know, Lisa, that you have a little bit of a different opinion to me. And what's that?
I love grammar. So probably that's because when I started learning English and other languages, so I've firstly focused on grammar, and of course I couldn't speak at all, but it helped me then learn all the vocabulary much faster. But also I just love grammar, so it's fun for me to learn, it's fun for me to teach. So that's why I think that both are important, and I can agree that up to some point vocabulary is probably more important, but you can't do without grammar, so you have to learn that. Okay, thank you so much for sharing your opinion, and I will stop sharing my screen and let's share our presentation again. And
okay.
And before we get more practical, let's talk about why grammar is important. So I'm sure that you've encountered an opinion, or probably you think that way, that grammar is probably something that you can avoid. Sometimes even the parents of your students say, like, my son doesn't want to do grammar, he wants to speak, so only to speak, but you have to explain and do something, because the person can actually speak before they know grammar. So, and grammar helps the student to speak fluently and confidently, and also express some clear ideas, which you can't do if if you don't know how to form your sentences. And also, I have a very interesting question. Probably it's a fun question for you. We know that we have teachers from all over the world, and English might be your native language or not. Think of your native language and answer this question. How confident are you in grammar tenses in your native language? And how confident do you feel when you have to explain those tenses? So rate your experience from 1 to 10. Let's see. Can you identify and name all the tenses in your language? 995. 7, 8. We have a few tens as well. That's cool. 7, 8, 9, 5, 10. 5.5. I like the precision. So great. Basically, if English is your native language and at the same time, that's the language that you teach, probably you're very confident in identifying different grammar tenses. At the same time, if you don't teach your native language, probably you know it intuitively, but you probably won't be able to explain it very well to a person who has never spoken this language and who doesn't know how it works. So this is where actually grammar also helps, and it's important to even teach yourself in order to explain it to somebody else. So grammar and vocabulary are equally important as they form those 4 main competencies in English, which are speaking, reading, listening, and writing. And if you don't do one of them, of course, you will not develop all the competencies to the fullest. But it doesn't mean that grammar is something that you have to suffer through to speak the language. So basically, to teach grammar, you have to keep the 3 points in mind. First of all, it's important that the grammar that you teach is age and level appropriate, and the student is able to understand what you are talking about. For example, there is no use in explaining present continuous to a person who doesn't know I don't know, personal pronouns or the verb to be. It doesn't make sense. They won't understand the structure. The second point is that the language that you use to explain the grammar shouldn't be more difficult than the grammar itself. I think it's self-explanatory. And the last one is that the curriculum should be very logical, and the grammar topics should repeat from time to time, but at the same time, they should get more and more complicated. So the first 2 points are something that you as teachers have to work on, but luckily the last point has already been solved for you. And you all know that many curriculums are based on the common European framework of reference or levels like A1, A2, and so on. And the Novakid curriculum is also based on this framework. However, it's a little bit different. And if you take a look at this table, of course, you will not read through that, but you will see that we teach different grammar structures in different levels. And also you can see that many of them repeat from one level to another. So I have another question to the audience. What do you think is the difference between, let's say, present simple in level 2 and level 3? So what is the difference? Why do we have to teach it twice? Even 3 times, probably.
All of the levels.
Yeah, it's all of the levels, but we don't name it present simple before it gets to level 2. So level 1, simple sentence. So I think that this question requires a lot of typing, so we will wait for you to answer. So level 3, complex. That's cool. But what changes in the student's mind? Regular and irregular verbs are in past simple. I think that's a good point, but in present simple, it's the students are younger when they're ready to learn that. To make complicated sentences, So it's easier to explain the other tenses once the
Mhm.
student understands it. That's a good point, because if you can see at level 3, we have present simple and continuous at the same time, and the student is able to compare those two tenses. So
And someone
that's
said
right.
it's a building block, which I think is the perfect explanation, because in level 0, they're only learning the first person. And in level 1 and level 2, they gradually learn more pronouns. And it's always in isolation. So the entire unit will only be on the present simple. And then by the time they're in level 3, that's when we kind of throw them a curveball and we're like, hey, here's another tense. Which one are you going to use? And so before that, in levels 0, 1, and 2, they're only getting the grammar in isolation. It's the only tense they're using. And then by the time they get into the higher levels, that's when we are making it more complex, like a lot of you have said, and we're making them choose between 2 different tenses to see if they've truly understood it before when they were learning it.
And also the vocabulary gets more complicated, and you're right, they are able to form more difficult sentences just because their vocabulary is bigger at this point, and of course they have more base to practice with. So we have talked about how grammar develops through the curriculum, and now Brittany will tell us how we actually teach the grammar.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. So we know that we teach more basic grammar concepts at the beginning, and we build on them as we progress through the levels. But how exactly do we teach grammar? There are a lot of different methods for teaching grammar. Some are from the top down, others are from the bottom up. The method that we're going to look at today, and one that's been proven successful in many studies, is the inductive method. More specifically, through the presentation, practice, and production model. When we teach grammar using the inductive method, we want our student to learn by usage and not just by rules. Think about it like going from an example to a generalization. We want our students to practice the grammar concept through all of their skills: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And we do this by first providing them with an example. This could be from a comic, from the curriculum. This could be through a short reading passage or a dialogue. And then we ask them questions about what they're reading. And the student is able to discover the grammatical rules on their own. This method, as I'm sure you're beginning to realize, is very child-centered, which leads to increased confidence, more learner autonomy, and higher motivation. Of course, this is just the beginning. After introducing the grammar concept in the presentation stage, your student will have an opportunity to practice and then produce the language, hopefully independently. Because by the time we get to that final stage, we want our students to be using the grammar confidently. But how do we do that? We're going to look at that next, but before we do, Lisa is going to let us know some more, or not some more, but some common errors that she's compiled that happen when we're teaching grammar.
Basically, to find out these common mistakes, we asked our assessors who watch loads of different lessons in different levels every day. And here are some common mistakes that they see probably when teachers teach grammar. First of all, it's when the explanation is harder than the target grammar. We talked about it already. Then it's lack of visual support. Also, it's poor error correction, overextended lecturing with no CCQs, even though our assessors think that many of our teachers are quite good at CCQs, but it's something that if you miss, then it really shows. Then the student doesn't get a chance to practice independently. Also, another mistake is not taking the student's prior knowledge into consideration and over-focusing on grammar even when doing some other types of tasks. And now let's talk about some practical tips based on these mistakes.
All right. So after reading some of these common mistakes, let's go through each.
I'm sorry. Just to answer the question right away. So CCQs are concept checking questions, and we will talk about them a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah. So sorry, Brittany.
No problem. So after reading some of these common mistakes, let's go through each of them now and look at ways to overcome them to facilitate learning. Now, before teaching any new grammar point, it's important to assess your students' prior knowledge. Does a student know what a vowel is before you try to teach them the articles a and an? Is your student able to differentiate between he, she, and they before teaching them the verb to be? Although these are very simple examples, they're really important things to consider. As we saw earlier, a lot of the grammar is repeated and built upon within the curriculum and through the levels. And if your student is missing an important step, they cannot be expected to master the next one. Even if it's a grammar tense that is new to your student or one that you're building upon, it's important to model each activity before expecting the student to be able to master it successfully. You can't just go to a slide and say, go, without helping your student to complete the activity. During these explanations, make sure to grade your language. Remember that less is more. And as Lisa explained earlier, your explanation of the grammar tense should not be more complicated than what your student can handle at their level. This also might mean not using terms like present simple, present continuous, when you're first introducing it to your students in level 1 or level 2, because these words are bigger than they're able to understand and that they're able to comprehend right away. Later on, in higher levels, you can begin to bring in these names of the tenses, especially when they are already on the screen in your curriculum, or if it's an important fact for them to recognize before they're able to look at the differences between them. Now, next, when it comes to error correction, it's important to remember all of your error correction techniques, whether it's by echoing the correct answer, making a confused face, or even finger counting. If you're curious about what error correction techniques to use, or if you're interested in expanding your skill set, Alona is going to place a link in the chat box right now for a previous webinar on error correction techniques. And along these same lines, remember that not all errors need to be corrected. Of course, if you're teaching a lesson on the present continuous, you should correct all errors that are made within that tense. For other errors, though, ask yourself if immediate error correction is needed, or if perhaps you could use skipped or even delayed error correction. If you're in the free talk stage, for example, and your student makes an error that doesn't impede your understanding, it might be best to just skip correction at that point, rather than over-focusing on each and every error. Because we want our students to be able to use the grammar independently, but they need to be given the chance to do so. Some students might be able to make sentences right away. Others might need a little bit of help. And that's where scaffolding becomes really important. Guide your student by drilling the grammar. You could use back chaining, you could use substitution, but by breaking down the grammar into manageable chunks for your student, you will gradually build their confidence. Provide additional support through these areas and work together. Most importantly, try to be patient with your student. It's okay if they don't get it right away, especially because we know that the grammar will be repeated later on, and because you have all of these extra practice lessons available. So if your student is struggling, it's not the end of the world, and they will have a chance to become more confident and proficient in it as they go on. So there doesn't need to be any stress when it comes to teaching grammar to your students. And this brings us to our next point, where sometimes you don't even need to say anything to help your student understand. And this is where your props or visual aids come into play. You can use flashcards or other versatile props, such as a whiteboard. You can use flashcards. Oh, I just said that. You can use all sorts of props or realia that you have. My favorite all level props are these simple circles that I like to use for all of my levels. It will help my students remember their articles. Maybe they've used an a and they should have used an an. Maybe they're confusing are and is. So I have a couple different options for that where they can, through CCQs, like how many have you got? Is there one? Is there two? Are we using are? Are we using is? This really helps them to self-correct by just seeing props on their own. After a while, some of my students just kind of see the yellow and they don't even need to know what's on the card because they already know. And that helps because all of my circles are different colors. And this helps them to feel more confident as they realize their errors and they're able to correct themselves before you even show them. And they get really excited about that. When it comes to using a whiteboard, I really like using it for simple grammar tenses or even more complicated ones such as comparatives and superlatives. And here I write simple, is there two of them? Is there three or more? Here are their endings and their beginning that they need, ist or most. And I also include the special keywords than and the. Super simple. If you were to just show someone this whiteboard, they probably wouldn't understand what you're talking about. But when your student is in class, it really helps them to see the key points that they need to be focusing on. Now, of course, these props are just aids. Your student might not actually need them, but it is worth having them so that you are prepared, so that if your student is mixing up their bigger or their biggest, you can say, how many? Is there two or three? And then they can see two or three. And then they can say, oh, I forgot than. And it really helps them to facilitate their learning. However, if you're going to use these, and I definitely recommend that you do, try not to use them during your unit review. Because at this point, we do want our students to be using the grammar independently. Of course, if you get to your unit review and your student is still struggling, use your props and definitely use your scaffolding and your modeling and everything to help them, but also make sure that you fail that competency. Because if your student isn't doing it confidently, independently, then there's no reason why they shouldn't do the extra practice because it's available to you and the extra practice lessons are fantastic, especially this one. The one on comparatives and superlatives is wonderful because it teaches the student like, this is a magic than, this is a magic the, and students love that because it's the Magic Academy. Now, finally, your best teaching tool is using CCQs to your advantage. If this is a grammar topic that you're not familiar with, make sure you teach yourself first and plan your CCQs. If it's not something that you're used to teaching, by reading up on it yourself, you'll be able to anticipate the problems that you think your student might have. And then you can invent the questions that you want to ask your student. This will also help you cut down on lecturing your student and will also reduce your TTT, your teacher talk time. And this will help your student increase their understanding and facilitate their learning. By teaching yourself first and planning your CCQs, you'll know what level you can pitch to your student so that they will be able to understand the grammar and that you won't be going into this complicated explanation that's only going to confuse them more. So I think you can see now that CCQs or concept checking questions are super important. Sometimes though, it's not that easy to think of your questions. So we've provided you with a short activity that we're going to do together where we are going to plan our CCQs together for a couple different slides and a couple different grammar points. So take a look at the slides and think of the questions you can ask as a CCQ and type your answer in the chat box. Before I show you the first slide, I want to just make sure that we're talking about the grammar. So your CCQ should focus on teaching the grammar on the slide, not necessarily the vocabulary. Okay, let's look at our first one together.
Please answer in the chat box. Also, I think So it's great if you just identify the grammar. You can also let us know in the chat box. So what we are trying to explain, and also check with our CCQs. So we have our first questions. What can you do? Can he climb? What can't Rooney do? Can she swim? Can he climb? Yes or no? So some people also suggest using TPR. So that's also a great idea. Okay, I think that we got a lot of questions.
All right, perfect. Sometimes too, you could just cover the words and ask the student to create the sentences using just the pictures. After they do that, then they can compare the sentences that they made with what they're reading. And this will help them. Well, my sentence is, he can climb. It says he can't climb, and that's not the same. So this is wrong. So this helps them to think about their own learning before they read the activity. And this can also help them decide the true or false to help them understand it. All right, let's move to our next one, which is the present continuous.
So present continuous, and also okay. So I love this one. Has he finished hiking? That's a great question, actually, but probably the aim for that is a little bit too complicated for this level. Yeah, that's level 2, and the students don't know the present perfect yet. But that's a great question if you want to teach how to differentiate between the present perfect and past simple.
Mm-hmm. So here it's important to test your students' prior knowledge to make sure that they understand that they're using am with I, they're using are with they, they're using is with she, and they're using are with we. And it's important that they understand what she is. So if your student doesn't know that she is for girls, it's going to be hard for them to create these sentences. And if they don't know that is for he, she, and it, then it's going to be more difficult for your student to progress later on. Okay, so let's look at our next one, which I've already shown you my whiteboard for, but this is our comparatives and superlatives in level 3.
Yeah, that's actually quite a difficult topic to explain. Probably no, it's easy to explain, but it's easy to confuse as well. So I think that students often get confused. Okay, is Venus hotter than Earth? Okay, probably. What planet is hotter than Earth? Great question, but not aimed at checking the grammar understanding, more than it's more about reading.
Mm-hmm.
So how many planets do we talk about? I love this one.
Yes, that's good too, especially if you circle the bubble and you say, how many planets?
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a perfect CCQ for this slide.
And you can also scaffold it down so that if they don't understand how many planets, you can ask them to circle the planets. So they could circle, or you can tell them circle Venus, circle earth, and then they can count. So there is all of these ways that you can scaffold the material for your student to help them with their understanding.
That's right.
Okay, great. I think we're ready for our next one.
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
Which is relative pronouns. I think this one is a little bit easier than some of our last ones.
It's more complex. I think that as grammar gets more difficult for the student, it also gets more easier to explain for the teacher, because the student already understands more complicated explanations and instructions. So, who is for? People or place? Good question. Do we use who for a person or a place?
Good.
Do we use who for school?
Good. Or is a school a place or a person?
Yeah. So, but it's like, I think that the question, do we use who for school? It's more complex, because you start eliminating these chains, like, is it a person or a place? You like immediately start thinking about that. Okay, I think that was easy.
All right. And our last one, which comes from one of our higher levels. So I think it might be a little bit more difficult, but again, maybe not, because when your student comes to this level, they are able to understand more complex explanations. But this is probably one of my favorite grammar tenses, like my favorite grammar topics to teach.
I can agree. I love this topic. Do we know when Luna was in London?
Good.
Perfect one.
The last month.
So use TPR to show past, present, future. Probably at this level, you can explain it. So TPR is great, but not all level 4 students need that. So actually they understand verbal explanations. But if you want to eliminate lecturing, then that's a good point.
And also, just to point out, on this slide, you can clearly see that we are calling tenses past simple and present perfect. And because we're showing it to our students, you can use these tenses because they've already learned both of them in isolation. So now when it's time to choose which one to use, you can use the official terms when doing it. And you can ask the student, okay, well, past simple, like you can have them circle the past simple. You can have them circle the present perfect. And this will also help them see that other visual and connect it to what they're learning.
That's right. So, okay, all great CCQs. I think that you get the point. That's great. Also, I loved when we were discussing some CCQs for this slide, I loved Brittany's example about like, do you know, or do we know? And also like,
is it important?
Do we care? Do we care about that? So that's a good question to ask. Okay, so I think that's
all right. Well, we've reached nearly the end of our presentation. The last couple minutes together, we will talk about some different games that we've compiled together that we really think will help your students with learning grammar. Now, these games are all low prep or no prep, which is really important when you just need a game to help you finish off your lesson, or you need that extra little push to help your students understand. So we're going to start. I'm going to close the presentation and Lisa's going to share our first game.
Yeah. Okay. So again, these games can probably be in the slides, but you can use them actually also for fast finishers and just to make your lesson a little bit more energetic. So my first game is Draw a Monster. This is a simple game for basically any level, starting from level 0. The point is that you ask your student to draw a monster using any colors, any shapes, any number of body parts that they want, but the only condition is that they need to say what they're drawing. For example, it has got 6 eyes. It is square, or it is green, it has green arms, anything like that. The more complex the grammar is, the higher the level is, so more grammar structures you can use. So basically you can even use like present continuous to explain what the monster is doing, or anything you want. So that's actually fun. It allows your student not only to memorize some grammar structures and distinguish between them, but also to show some creativity. And you will also have a picture to remember a student by, which is cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So our next activity is probably one that you're all super familiar with and that you've probably played with your students, and that's charades. So you can use charades for a lot of different grammar tenses. The easiest one, the one that we'll show you now, is for present continuous, where you can ask your student, what am I doing? And my student will say,
You are running.
Fantastic. And your student will ideally answer in a full sentence. Now, which Lisa did because she's fantastic. So another way you can do that is by incorporating your vocabulary when you want to play these games with your student. This is one that I've played all the way with my little 4-year-olds, is after I've introduced all of the vocabulary using TPR, I'll ask my student, we're going to say, I've got. So I'll be like, oh, and I might make, I'm trying to think of one. So let's go with this one.
I've got a car.
Good. So we're having our student answer, I've got, and then the vocabulary. This is what I use for kite, but we hadn't prepped that. So I was like, this might not work out.
I was so confused about this one. So
this was teddy bear.
That was teddy bear, right?
All right. So super simple. You can use it as a quick warm up. You can use it as your cool down, but it's super effective. Always let your student do one afterwards. My students always choose a word that's not one that we're studying, which makes it a little more difficult, but you know what? That's cool too. All right, so our next game.
Unlike the previous games, the next game is more for higher levels and for older students. This is the conditional chain. As you have probably guessed, it's about training some conditional sentences. It doesn't matter which. But at Novakid, we teach only conditional 0 and the first conditional. So that's why you don't have much choice, but still you can play this game. The point is that you take turns with your students and say conditional sentences starting with if, and your student has to make another sentence and start the sentence using the second part of your previous sentence. For example, if I do my homework, my mom will be happy.
If my mom is happy, she will buy me sweets.
If my mom buys me sweets, I will be fat.
If I am fat, oh, that's terrible. Okay. If I am fat, I will.
Okay, you got the point. That's okay. So probably you shouldn't. You shouldn't use the words like fat, but it's like the first thing that comes to my mind. Actually, you can use different topics, not only like something every day, and you even can create some fantasy stories. That's a fun game to do. And of course, if your student struggles, you can just change something on spot. So, or if your story gets too dark or too sad, something like that. Okay, so the next game.
Our next activity is called Who Am I? What am I? Where am I? It can be any rendition of that. All you need is a person, a place, or a thing. And for that, you can use a flashcard, or you can use a picture on your slide with a lot of vocabulary on it. And you can use any grammar tense you'd like. So I'm going to explain a place to my student. And I'm going to say, there is a lot of glass here. You must wear goggles. This is a place where a scientist works.
So a lab.
A lab, good. Okay, so for these, you can make it as easy or as difficult as you want for your students. This is late in level 3. So some of my students really like to make it complicated and make their clues really ambiguous. I don't care as long as they're using the grammar properly. But it's a great opportunity for you to switch and practice with your students so that they're not only processing the grammar, but they're also using it to talk about, there is, there are, demonstrative pronouns, the modal verbs of obligation. There's a lot of different things you can practice with this. And it doesn't have to be only on that one slide where the game is available to you. You can do it anytime you'd like. All right. Our next one.
Okay, our next game is actually the modification of a famous child game, Simon Says. I'm sure that you all know the rules. If you don't know, it's the game about instructions. And if you give an instruction and add Simon Says before these instructions, for example, Simon says run, then your student or somebody you play with should do that. And if you don't add Simon Says, then they should do nothing. So just stop and freeze. And of course, this is a fun and energetic game, but we want it to have more meaning, and to practice some grammar tenses, anything like that. So basically, you can make a rule that if you use one structure, your student has to show it. And if you use a different structure, then your student doesn't do anything. For example, if I say a sentence in present continuous, my student does that. If I say it in present simple, they don't do that. Or, for example, you can use it to practice can and can't. For example, I say, I can run, and my student imitates running. Or I say, I can't jump, and my student is doesn't do anything. So that's also a cool game, and it will help your student to express their energy. So, and will also serve some purpose and have some meaning.
Perfect. So next we have a game that's called One Word at a Time, or even I think in the curriculum, it's called Pass the Ball. So with this, we are going to say one word each to make a sentence. And you can use this as early as level 1, maybe not level 0, and use very simple sentences. For example, I
am
running. And then my student would start.
You
are
happy.
Okay. So here you can practice, your verb to be, your present continuous. You can practice anything else you'd like. However, if you want to play this with your higher level students, you can play it in a way where the person who finishes the sentence is the winner. So if you can't add anything else to the sentence, you don't win. For example, I
am
a
turtle
who which
swims
in
the
ocean
and
eats
some
shrimp.
Okay.
So here, when we get into the higher levels, we want our students to be using their relative pronouns that they used, or but, because, so. We want them to be using linkers to try and elongate their sentences so that they can build upon them and see how long of a sentence that they can make. Now, Lisa has an alternative to this game, which she will explain now.
Okay, first of all, 2 alternatives. The first one is you can simply use the timer for that. So you can set your timer for 30 seconds or 1 minute, depending on how much time you have left in your class. And for example, the person who doesn't have time to say something during that timer loses. So it makes it more competitive, and you have to think really fast. And I love nonsense stories. So when you talk about some that you are turtle turtle that it's shrimp in the ocean. That's a cool story to remember and also to practice. Okay, and another game, it's also can be used as like drilling. It's back chaining. So basically you say something backwards. For lower levels, you can use some simple sentences. You provide the student with the correct answer and have them say it backwards. For example, I am happy.
Happy am I.
Yeah, that's right. That's simple, but also it's not that simple for a student who is only starting learning language, because they have to think of the words like separately, and it helps them memorize the structures better. But for some higher levels and for some students who love challenges, you actually can do one word at a time, but backwards. So it's also fun. It can have I don't know, it can be nonsense, have a lot of mistakes, but at the same time, the student will really rethink their grammar knowledge. So that's
Our
all.
last game.
I think.
I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, that's right.
We're going to go really fast. The last game is one that I use for fast finishers if I'm in the production stage. And that's simply, I use a dice. You could use the spinner in the curriculum. I also have a like fidget spinner because students really like those. And for this, they just simply have to make as many sentences as the number says in the grammar tense we've been learning. So if I use my fidget spinner and it's a 3, my student has to make 3 present continuous sentences. And Lisa, 3 present continuous.
I am swimming. He is dancing. She is smiling.
Fantastic. And then I always save my last star for the end to give my student as like a congratulatory at the end. Now, the benefits of using a dice over using the spinner in the curriculum is you can kind of rig it to being the right number that you want. So if you know that you're running out of time or your student is a little bit lower level, you can kind of rig it so that they only have to make 2 sentences. Or if your student is really strong, you can rig it so it's 5 sentences. And is your student going to catch on? Probably, but that's okay because every student gets to succeed in this way because you're giving them something that they can manage. All right. So I think we have finished with our games. We're going to move to our question and answer.
Yeah, that's right. We have just a few questions, but if you guys still have questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat box. Also, if you have to run to your classes, or so please follow the link in the chat box and fill in the feedback form. This way, we will get the certificate and you will have a chance to participate in our competition. So about the questions. Question 1, what would you suggest for students finishing level 2 that have not grasped most grammar concepts despite having done all the extra grammar lessons?
All of them.
Probably, yeah.
I guess it depends on how old the student is and if they are truly not ready to go into the next level. So as we've like mentioned through this webinar, is a lot of the grammar is built upon. So even if you haven't quite like mastered it, usually the first lesson in a new unit is a review of the past level, and then it builds on that. It makes a difference if your student doesn't understand the grammar of level 1, for example, or if your student doesn't understand the grammar of level 3. Because if you're going from level 1 to level 2, the jump isn't so severe. Whereas if you're going from level 3 to level 4, it's quite a significant jump for your student. So it depends on where the student is. They might need to repeat the level. If their age is young enough that they wouldn't really demotivate them. I have a student who did level 3 twice completely because the student wasn't prepared to go to level 4. Luckily, the student did level 3 old curriculum and then level 3 Novakid Game World. So it was the same material.
That's convenient.
But completely different for the student. And so it worked out really well. And I think because we still have both options, maybe that's something that could happen. Maybe they could do the entire level again.
So basically, yeah, it really depends on your student. And basically, if you feel that your student is not prepared for the next level at all, file a level adjustment. So let's see, test your student first, see what prior knowledge they have. It's like probably they don't have to repeat the whole level 2, but they can repeat a few units or something like that. And after that, our specialist from the support second line team will observe the classes, and you together will find the best solution. It also really depends on the parents, because some parents really love when you notice that the student is not ready for the next level, but some of them don't want to repeat the same, and we can't blame them for that. So that's why I think that such situations are better to be looked into individually. Okay, the next question. What if the parents insist to let their children speak freely and not focus on correcting grammar lapses? What will I do?
So I have a couple students like this where the parent has outright told me they don't care if their student follows the curriculum. So I found a compromise. We repeat every lesson once. So they will do the material in 2 lessons, and I split my lesson so that it's like half curriculum and then half more of a free talk based on the curriculum. So I let them draw while they speak about what they're drawing or what they've done. It does elongate their program because they'll be doing every lesson twice, but it's like a happy medium between you and your parents and your student. So you don't want to completely give up the curriculum, because that's a lot of work on you as the teacher, and it's not fair to you and it's not fair to the student because they're not actually learning properly. So try to find that happy medium or that compromise where you can make the parent happy, but also make sure that your student is using proper grammar in a more laid back or fun way for them.
Yeah, that's right. And also sometimes we need to understand that people who are not involved in teaching or don't know much about ESL, something like that, they think that grammar is something that is like just lecturing on some rules. And they don't want that. It doesn't mean that they don't want their children to practice something. If you try to switch the explanation and lecturing to some games and practice, then probably the parents will be happy, because it's not I don't think that there are parents who are like, I don't want my child to learn. So it's not about that. They just don't want them to like listen to some lectures or probably the situation when the students don't have enough time to speak. So probably that's the problem. Okay, the next question is about CCQs. Okay, this question is a little bit, I'm not sure that we can answer that correctly. How do you cover the words in classroom? It was not, if the person who asked this question is still here, so please specify what exactly you mean, and we will try our best to answer this question. Meanwhile, the next one, what do you do if the parents select a topic like a period of time with facts that the student has no interest in the subject?
Is this for Virtual Explorer?
For the period of time, facts the student has no interest in the subject. I'm not so sure. It's probably, yeah, about the fact when the parents choose some topics to cover, which is quite rare, at least at Novakid. So probably if you are tutoring, then it can be a problem. Or probably it's just, yeah, probably it's Virtual Explorer. Okay, if the student has no interest in the subject, I think that's the main problem here. Okay, I'm not sure that it's about grammar though. But if the student in any way try to find something that the student can relate to, even in virtual explorer classes, there are some, I don't know, history topics, some geography topics, but there are some personal questions that if you really share something with the student and ask them to share their opinions, they probably will like that. So, and another piece of advice, I think that Brittany said it before, that if you feel that your student is not interested at all, try to devote some short time to the topic and then have some free time to speak about something that they're interested in. So I hope that that answers your question. Okay, so that's all for the questions, I think.
I think so.
So yeah, guys, about the certificates, so just fill in the feedback form, and if you finish the feedback form, you will definitely get the certificate probably next week. So don't worry, just the feedback form is pinned in the messages. So I think that's all that so that's all that we wanted to cover today. Thank you so much, guys, for your active participating, for coming today. See you next month. So probably also like we will cover some interesting topics. Thank you, Alena.
All right, and we'll see you in a future webinar.
See you. Bye-bye.